Thabile Msibi is Northwest Secretary of Youth in Business South Africa. She joins us now to talk a little bit more about this. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Ms. Msibi. I hope you don't mind my calling you Thabile. So next year will be 20 years since the promulgation of the Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment Act. And I want to look at what progress has been made. And I won't focus on the youth for now, because I want to look at this timeline. So we're being told that in terms of self-employed people, they make up 1 in 3 of all employed people in rural areas and 1 in 7 in towns. Do you think this is an accurate reflection of the figures?
Thank you for having me, Tepiso, and good evening to your viewers. I think we need to start asking ourselves in terms of responding to racial issues and the inequality on whether, when we start promulgating these acts, are we looking at putting these acts for a more sustainable term, or are we just looking at closing the gap for that moment? Because if you look at South Africa, based on the stats that you've just given me, the figure is actually 1 in 20 in both rural and urban areas that you get self-employment and entrepreneurship thriving. And that is very worrisome in terms of the environment. Is this environment, the South African environment, much conducive for entrepreneurship to thrive? Is it conducive for Black industrialists to thrive? So those are the questions that we should actually ask ourselves.
And I suppose we should also look deep into the ideologies or the models that we follow. I mean, we know that some of those are borrowed from Latin American socialist countries, the Asian tigers, for instance. And I want to look at China, for instance. If you look at the comparison, it's quite intriguing. We say we model some of our policies on that, but their average in terms of people that are employed both in rural and urban areas, the figure in South Africa is 1 in 20. But in comparison to China, 46%, that's an average of 31% in also other upper middle income economies. Some would say we're not, but it's pretty much what we're striving towards. Are we following these models within a commensurate context of where South Africa is? Because we know that it's been often argued that we've had a colonialism of a certain type. So that means that we need to have a unique solution-based approach.
That's correct, Natapi. So, I mean, we need to look if our problems that we're facing, are they at an equivalent rate as China's problems? Are we having facilities that will allow, for entrepreneurship to thrive, or that will allow for entrepreneurship to grow, the way China's entrepreneurship is put, or their new laws, the way they put? Are we having the same problems? Is our environment as fitting as China's environment? We really need to compare apples with apples. And if we can see that the comparison is partially different, we need to use a different approach in terms of how we tackle our issues in South Africa, especially when it comes to growing entrepreneurship in the country.
I don't know how much you followed the discussions at the conference earlier on, but just the excerpt that we played of that panel discussion, I mean, just looking at what some of our challenges are and what the president lamented. He was saying the problem that we're still facing is the concentrated nature of the economy and ownership patterns, but particularly exclusion from major value chains, as you heard from some of those panelists during the uprisings or riots in July. The fact that we as Black people in townships are still shut out from the bread value chain, which is pretty much our bread and butter, so to speak.
I mean, those are just a few, the basic barriers that Black entrepreneurs face. And you then ask yourself, like I said earlier, is this really a conducive environment for businesses to thrive? And that's not only the only problem that Black entrepreneurs face. In fact, you find that Black entrepreneurs are not as exposed to funding so that they can be able to scale their businesses. You find that how finances are managed in the business, even if the business is open, it's really weaker management of finances. You find that there's so much inequality in terms of the competition around a particular market. So that just adds to the much inequality and the much very stagnant growth in Black industrialists. So it is quite worrisome.
So speaking of funding, some of the gains the president announced in his speech earlier on, saying that over the past 11 years, for instance, enterprises have been supported to the value of 55 billion, saying over the past 6 years, the DTI and the IDC, the NEF and other agencies have supported approximately 900 Black industrialists. Now, just looking at the demographic quotient of youth who are unemployed, that's almost at 70%. How much of that demographic can be counted within this cohort that the president says are the areas of gain?
So I think the first question is, are those, instruments that the government is making available reaching the actual targeted people? Because that's another issue in South Africa. We know that the actual targeted people do not actually get whatever instruments that government opens up, for the growth of the economy, for the much participation of Black industrialists, youth-owned companies. So that's the first question, because the president can definitely say this much was made available, but are those instruments actually reaching the targeted people who should be participants in the growth of the economy?
Oh, thank you so much for speaking to us, Thabile Msibi. She is with the Northwest Secretary of Youth in Business South Africa, and just looking at some of the challenges that the president has said, admitted to, saying that we still have persistent and deep-running structural defects that are obviously belied by the high levels of joblessness in this country.